Now we're going back into the charter deliberation section of the meeting. You'll remember last time I was very pleased that there seemed to be listening and movement going on about the possibilities. I thought that was very healthy. By the end, I knew it had gone on way too long, so I just mumbled when asked what my position was. I think it might be helpful if I express where I'm leaning at this point. And then I'd also like to hear from Paul Dennis and Jim Moeller, since they did not have the opportunity. And then we'll go back into general discussion again. I am, too, leaning toward the hybrid that Ann Rivers talked about at the last meeting. I've heard two main problems listed for the need for an elected county exec. That there's a need for separation of powers to provide staff with one boss and not 3 to 5 pulling in different directions. With no vision, I've heard the term just muddling along. No incentive to work together because they're not, they don't even know what the common vision is, and so it's difficult. And they're often distracted by fires coming from different commissioners away from their assigned direction. Then the second one is a need for a single person who is the voice and figurehead leader of the county, particularly important in representing the county with other governmental entities, prospective business and industrial leaders and others, but also conveying the legislative body's direction and adopted vision for the county's future to its citizens. I agree totally with both of those needs, but I share the concerns that Peter Silliman spoke of last week of even more polarization and political infighting between the branches, and I just feel that's exactly what we don't need right now. That's why that I'm favoring the hybrid with an appointed professional administrator selected by a supermajority of the council, and a strong wording in the charter itself prohibiting meddling in administration by the members of the county council. Even though I have serious concerns about electing by district, I don't feel that's one I'm going to prevail on. So I think the 5 county council members with 4 elected by district and the figurehead, county government figurehead of the people would be the one elected at large, and that would fulfill the second need. I agree with something that Mark Bolt said, that the council and administrator need to work as a team and with a common vision for the county and working together toward that vision. I prefer this less polarizing solution, and I understand the need for that several have spoken about to slow the process down. But I think it's at the decision-making process that you need to have it slowed down, and not in the implementation of that decision that's made. And so I would think that in the charter, or the elected officials themselves could adopt higher standards, like many cities and counties have, if you have to have 2 or 3 readings of a particular item before it's voted on, so that the people, it's the citizens themselves, have an opportunity to slow that down, and not necessarily the polarization of a veto, override veto, that sort of thing. I agree with others that possibly that we can't construct a strong enough firewall, and that I'm dreaming to think that that is possible. But if in a few years, the beauty of a charter is if in a few years Another commission, charter commission, decides that, hey, there's still too much legislative influence over the administrator, then they can go to the next step, which would be an elected county exec. So that's long enough for me. That's just, I was asked by several people, where are you coming from? You're dodging the bullet, and so there it is. And now, Paul, Dennis.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I guess we all get to show our cards that we're holding in our hand and where we're coming from.
Yeah, it's time.
No poker at this table. You know, the way I approach this and the way I look at this is mostly from my background, and during my life, as short or as long as it's been, I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of different communities and see different forms of government, see different individuals, different structures, and just see how things work well and how they don't. I think the common denominator across all the communities is you really have to have good elected officials. Regardless of the structure, it really comes down to having good people serving for the public and not personal agendas. And I'm not being accusatory to anybody here in this county or around this table or anything like that. It really just comes down to you have to have good people. Any structure you select, the outcome, or one of the outcomes you want is if you don't necessarily have a good governing body, is you want to minimize the collateral damage inside the organization and to the community. Hopefully you've got highly functioning elected officials, and that way you can maximize the benefits of whatever structure that you've sought out for your government, for your community, and so forth. With that said, to a certain degree, let me back up. You know, in terms of the district, voting in district versus at large, you know, I'm kind of indifferent to that. I see the pluses and minuses to both sides. I do like the idea of having at least one person at large. You see this in many city governments where you might have individuals that are selected to represent a district. They might still be elected at large for a general election, but having one person at large is, I think, of great benefit. You know, having districts, especially if you have populations where you have highly concentrated minorities or so forth, I think that can be beneficial to have districts at that point, just to ensure that there's a voice coming out of those segments of your community. In terms of do you have an appointed or an elected executive, I'm really leaning more towards the elected executive because I really think when it comes down to the day-to-day operations, having a single voice can be very, very important. I think, or I know that many ways of trying to, for lack of a better word, control what happens within government can be handled through the checks and balances. And it really gets down to the budget authority. If you have an executive that you really just disagree and you're the policymakers, you don't have to provide the budget authority to let them do the things that they want to do. Some people may see that as childish, where, you know, I'm not going to give you toys if you can't play well. But it really is the checks and balances. And, you know, we have three branches of government for a reason. We have a judicial, a legislative, and executive branch. And I strongly feel that you do need to have those checks and balances. That said, I think even if we have elected executive, you know, depending on where we land on some of the other issues, we'll likely enter into a discussion, do you still have an appointed county administrator assisting the elected executive or not? And it looks like from looking at some of the larger counties, in many cases, that's what you do have, is you still have that elected executive, but you also have an administrator that's assisting that elected official.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's where I'm coming from right now. You know, I still have an open mind whether or not we do just go to 5 commissioners, 1 at large. But my leaning really is more towards that elected executive.
Okay. Jim Moeller.
Well, first of all, I guess I wasn't here only for part of the meeting last week.
Right.
So I need to understand what the hybrid is that's all being talked about.
Well, what I spoke about was the idea that you need a focal point person. That was agreed upon, but it wouldn't need to be an elected executive. It might more appropriate be a chair and leader of the county council group that would actually be the voice of the county and not the administrator. And that the administrator would be appointed by their qualifications and not by their, I think the term used by Ms. Pike was popularity. What else would you like to know?
That's important. Well, currently, I'm favoring a 5-commission board, 4 elected by district, 1 elected at large, with an appointed county administrator, and that's my experience primarily. Is my experience has been with a professional city administrator, and I think that coming together as a commission to hire the one employee of that commission is important. That's how I would look at it.
Okay, now you have heard from the 3 people that you didn't hear from during your discussion, and I would like to now open it up to the floor to anyone here that would like to add to this conversation. And you can reiterate what you said last time, or you can change it a little, whatever you like to do. Or you can change it a lot, whatever. Mr. Wilson, have you flipped? I only say that. I'm not picking on Mr. Wilson, but at the last time he said that he had pretty much flipped. So, and I thought that was positive that people are moving and thinking and listening.
No, I'm pretty much where I was last time. I agree with the principles of separation of the powers, but I recognize that we already have that to a large extent. We have a separately elected auditor, we have the sheriff, we have the assessor, the county prosecutor, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the administrative functions are already subdivided. And I don't see any compelling reasons, even though I know there's a lot of pros and cons, and I understand them, but I don't see any compelling reasons put forth that would lead us to further separate the administrative functions than they already are.
Oh, really? Okay. Is that what you said last time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just still in the flop mode right now.
Okay.
And no more flipping.
I'm trying very hard to remember what everyone said last time, and I have kind of studied your comments, but Pat Gelada?
Yes. I'm not going to reiterate what I said last time, but I had thought a lot about what Mr. Wilson said, that we already have the separation of powers, but it cannot be a true separation of powers when the one group controls the budget for all the others. We have an elected sheriff, but as we have seen, he is dependent upon the legislative and executive Board of Commissioners for his budget. So there really isn't an
Can everyone hear
equal-
Pat?
No.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
These mics, I think, are set a
And
little
here
lower.
I'm usually so loud.
Yeah.
I think that Gary Lucas would be the first one to say that he certainly does not have an equal standing when he has to take a cut in his budget every budget cycle. So it could be seen as a gathering of equals since everyone is an elected official, but it doesn't work out that way in real life.
Yeah.
Oh, we're back. Mr. Wilson.
A debate.
well, we'll try not to turn it into debate, but just to answer that. And I think that brings up some very good points. However, the sheriff still wouldn't be in control of his budget. You'd still have a situation where, though the executive branch may be coming forward with the budget and presenting the budget, the county council would still have the final say in whether to adopt that budget or not. So I'm not sure that separating those into a separate executive branch would fully address that issue anyway.
Okay. Ms. Pike.
Thank you, Nan. Pat, I just think having different groups competing to set the budget would be just impossible to manage. I mean,
Exactly.
Okay, so we agree on that.
Yes. That's exactly my point.
Did I see your hand up, Ann Rivers?
Madam Chair, I have a process question. So we've now talked 3 times about sort of our vision for this position, and I was wondering if you had in mind when we were going to take a vote, because from my perspective...
Before we finish today
Okay.
on this discussion, I would like at least a straw vote, not a final vote of any kind, a straw vote so that we can give Kelly Sills some walking papers about what this charter segment should look like. So that's what I'm shooting for. But I wanted to make sure that the folks that have had a couple of weeks to think about what they said and what others said at the last meeting had an opportunity to express that before we go to that.
I'm very appreciative of that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes, Mark Bolt.
Thank you. I've was originally for county executive. I still am inclining that. However, Peter made some good comments when I looked at the last charter that come to the voters. It was fragmented, so I think it is probably more important to me that we get our foot in the door and that we start a charter. I don't know. Last time there was a couple things on the ballot, so I don't know if we could have a charter and then also another line on the ballot to say, do you want a county executive? So
We were hoping that this group would make that decision
Yeah.
and that we'd go to the people with yes or no,
Okay, yeah.
because it was confusing the last time.
It was. That's what defeated it last time.
Yeah. So with that, I think you're right. There needs to be a good firewall on the, if it is appointed, on the county administrator. That is kind of hard to do, but I think we can do it. It is kind of a way out there, but I would almost... we want a county administrator that serves all the people, including the cities. So it is a far-out notion to say that the county administrator shall have the support of all the mayors. That is way out there. I
That
realize,
might be
you know.
reaching, but it's an interesting idea.
But I think, that we need to find a way to give the council a little, to make them be more broad-minded. And so I'm probably going for the county administrator.
County administrator.
Appointed, yeah.
Temple Lentz, did I see your hand kind of halfway up a while ago, waiting?
Probably just a reflexive need for more caffeine. I'm currently, I was last meeting, and I'm still leaning toward elected county executive, but it's a soft lean. I've heard a lot of good arguments for both, and in talking to people in the community, I'm still hearing both as well. And I think for me, it still comes down to the basic concern of separation of powers. I think that if we come up with a solution that secures that, then we're meeting a goal. We have the difficult task of creating an infrastructure for a government for the future that isn't entirely in reaction to events we may agree or disagree with that are going on right now. And I know that I myself, as I think about it, have a hard time sometimes separating that and thinking, what do I want to fix about what's happening this week, and what do I want to think about for the future? And an important thing for me is making sure that what we do for the future can help prevent events that have occurred recently. So I feel very strongly that we do need to separate powers. If we can come up, if we do go in the direction of appointed, and we come up with a firewall, if we come up with a way to separate those powers so that the legislative branch cannot control what the executive branch does, I will be comfortable moving toward an appointed county manager. However, listening to what Greg Kimsey was saying earlier, I do very much feel that the elected is closer to the voters, that it provides greater accountability, and that's something that our community values. And it does slow down the deliberative process. I think that is also something that is very important in the kind of government that we have nationally, and we should emulate that locally as well.
Could I ask you a question about that? Slowing down the deliberative process, isn't that part of the, I'm confused about, because I heard that before. The deliberative process comes before an ordinance is passed. Once it's passed, then it goes to administration for implementation. So isn't the structure needing to be slowing down the decision-making process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and with what you said earlier, I would agree with that I don't necessarily want to slow down the process of doing government and managing decisions that have been made. However, I want to make sure that decisions can't be made quickly and without valid deliberation and input.
So there needs to be some instruction, well, there could be some instruction about that legislative branch, how it would become more deliberative in how they make decisions.
Yes.
I don't see that the elected administrator could really affect that deliberation until that person has a chance to veto what has already been decided, and then you get the back and forth. So
I see. I think we're probably talking about very similar things,
okay,
but defining them slightly differently.
Okay.
I'll take on to what Temple said. That's pretty much where I'm coming from as well. That need for that separation. Talking about deliberation, some of that can just be handled through rules or guidelines that the commissioner council would set themselves. One of the things we did in Camas was we actually went to a rule where things had to be workshopped twice before you even brought it to a regular meeting for a vote. And that was just deliberate to make sure that you slowed it down, made sure that you had a couple of weeks to think about what was said and bring it up again and just be a little bit more thoughtful. And it's not that we're not being thoughtful, but many times you're presented with a stack of information and it's like cramming for an exam every week. And sometimes you get lost in the forest of all this information, and when you take time out to deliberate, then you're able to just kind of relax that mind and try to think of things and see where everybody else is coming from and make a more educated decision. And that's all we want. It's, right. I mean, we're not always going to make the right decision as elected officials. It's just, that's going to be impossible. None of us are perfect.
All 15 of us are.
But as long as we can come from an educated standpoint and be thoughtful in our decision-making process, I think that's what's important. In terms of the executive versus the legislative branch, the way I look at the auditor and the assessor and the sheriff and so forth, those in a state government or a city government form wouldn't be necessarily elected. They would be appointed by the executive branch. So, in the system that we have right now, we're actually letting the voters appoint the department heads. And they get to propose their budgets to a county administrator or manager and then bring that onto a commission. If you go to an elected executive, it's going to be the same thing. The added step is now you're not only meeting with the county manager or administrator, you're also meeting with the elected executive, and it's just an added step in there. But there's no matter, it gets back to my earlier comment, no matter what form we're picking, in the grand scheme of things are going to function about the same. It's just who is going to be able to make some of those internal decisions. And I think the firewall really is what's going to be key, so that staff doesn't have 3 or 5 or 7 or, God forbid, 9 different bosses, right? I mean, if you got 9 different people telling you what to do, how are you going to get anything done? If you've got a single voice telling you this is where we're moving, this is what needs to be done, this is what was decided last night at the commission meeting, let's get underway, you can be far more effective at that point. And I think that separation at firewalls is really what's going to be key in the end.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Mark.
Thank you. From Mrs. Cook, good to see you. The question I have right now is, we have a interim county executive. So if we go to, and the county commissioners are waiting for us to figure out what we're going to do. If we go to a county administrator, just like we have now, is there a way to put in the charter that if the charter goes through and we have 5 county commissioners, that them county commissioners will be able to pick a new county administrator? What I don't want to see happen is that, all right, we go with a county administrator right now. The county commissioners say, all right, it's going to stay, as it is. So they pick the county administrator right now before the 5 to get in. And I don't know if there's a way to do that in the charter, but that's kind of a worry of mine.
I would think that there would be a way to have an effective date or a date of appointment specified in the charter.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Mr. Silliman, I should come back to you because you're trying to chew your muffin, I can tell.
Would you please?
Yeah.
Got time to make eye contact with the chair.
So while you're doing that, I'll do a little filler piece here. Not to muddy the waters, and I don't know that really talking about the budget and deliberating the budget issue is what you're supposed to be doing this morning as much, but one thing to consider about the budget in terms of the separation of powers and the balance of powers is that the elected executive could also be granted the power of line item veto, so that the budget gets proposed by the executive, is deliberated upon, and then approved by the council. But then that last step is the power of the executive to veto line items in that budget.
So that's an even stronger veto than just sending it back. That's it's pretty hefty. Mr. Silliman.
Yeah, so I would like to reiterate a couple of my points and maybe stake out an additional position relative to the idea of an at-large or hybrid solution. One of the things I'd like to point out is our commissioners now deal with other department heads, such as the sheriff, prosecutor, auditor. They're elected heads of their departments, but we're not talking about that, just an elected head of a department when we're talking about an elected executive. We're talking about somebody that has veto power potentially over decisions, whether they're policy or budget, that the legislative body makes. None of those current heads have that power. So there has to be negotiation there, but the final authority over their budget does rest currently with the board. So that's one of the changes I don't want to see, because again, to get back to prior discussion and the points that Dr. Long made was, if you go to an elected executive, by definition, with separation of powers, it does make it more political. It does make it more polarizing. That person does have a significant amount of power and say over what the board does. It does slow down deliberations, because whatever the board passes, if they want it to be successful, they've probably taken the time to pre-negotiate with the executive as well, so they know what will pass rather than just having him stamp a veto and have it come back. So it is a little bit more of a political process, and I think our county's had enough politics. We don't really want to deal with politics at the county level. We'd like to elect our representatives, let them take care of the business of the county, which really mostly should not be political. We've talked about being nonpartisan, and a lot of these issues that we're supposed to deal with at the county level are nonpartisan issues. So the problem that I see with the elected executive, one of them, is that it makes things more political because of that balance of power. As we also discussed with Dr. Long before, there really is no cost savings. It's not an equivalent of moving the current county administrator that's appointed over and making him elected. As Paul, I think, pointed out, you usually have an elected executive that takes care of political issues, and his role is not the same as an administrator. He usually has an administrator below him that takes care of running the regular business. So there isn't a cost savings or an equivalency to it. We're talking about an additional cost. I'd also like to point out that just by increasing the number of commissioners on the board, we are increasing checks and balances. Some of the issues people have brought up is 2 people have too much power because they can make a decision that affects the whole county. Well, if we increase the commissioner to 5, now it requires 3. That's a check and balance just in itself. That's almost the equivalent of having 3 commissioners and an elected executive. You have to get 3 people to agree to pass anything. So please consider that. That's a check right there that we're increasing the board numbers. Also, electing people by smaller districts is a check and balance. You've increased decreased the number of people required to elect that person. That means their accountability to those people has increased. If they're not satisfied with their job, it's easier for them to be removed from office. If we went to 5 districts, we're talking 20,000 people voters to get elected potentially. So rather than 100,000, it's a lot easier to remove that person if they're really radical and not representing those people in that district well. So putting all those things together and considering the negatives of having a separate county executive, one other point I'll make is look at it in a negative light instead of just the positive lights. I tell people, if you're a Democrat, how would you like David Medore to be in that position? Do you still think it's a great idea having David Medore being the elected county executive? Because he's a countywide elected political figure. I imagine he'd probably run for that. I don't think it's going to be the nonpartisan, non-political person that somebody ideally would like to have. It's not going to be the professional that we currently have now. It's going to be a political figure. If you're a Republican and you favor an elected county executive, picture Steve Stewart there, or Tim Levitt if he's your favorite, antagonistic figure. Picture him being there, and then say, do I really think that's a check and balance that I want to see there? And me looking at it, I say no. Yeah, I don't want David Medore there. I don't want Tim Levitt there. I would like it to remain a professional person running our county administration and not have it a political position.
Was that it, or?
So that's why I've leaned towards favoring an appointed county administrator. But going back to the points that came up last week, the idea that we would like to have maybe a county figure that does represent our county on the board as a stronger political figure, or at the state level with our legislators or whatever. I do like the idea of having a board member, maybe equal with the other members on the board as far as votes, but maybe elected at large. The only distinctive is that they get the chair position and they maybe represent the county. And
they are the figurehead.
And be kind of the figurehead. If we are looking at that model, just something that's kind of going in my mind is maybe we have 5 commissioners elected at large, 5 elected by district, maybe 2 that are elected at large, and the person out of those 2 that gets the most votes maybe is the chairperson. But if we want to discuss that more, maybe we should have if the board favors that model, maybe we should, rather than vote on that model, we should have more discussion about how that model would look like, if that makes sense. Because I think there's some options just within that model.
Val Ogden, you were the other person I noticed on the tape that didn't really express where you're coming from at any detail. do you have any comments to add to this discussion about the pros and cons as you see them? But you need to get the mic right up to your face.
Well, I think at the time I had talked about I keep hearing some of the other reasons to have elected. So right now I'm still listening. Yes, I think I'm still leaning toward the appointed, but I'm not real firm as I was before.
You're soft like Temple Lens. A soft lean. Is that what you called it?
I think that statement has never been said before in history.
Randy Mueller.
Madam Chair, I certainly wouldn't want to cut debate off if people still, have things to say. I do, kind of getting back to what Freeholder Rivers mentioned as far as process. I think we're at one of those kind of forks in the road here. For example, the discussion of we're doing a lot of if-then. If it's going to be appointed, then what does a commission look like? And is then one of them elected countywide? And then, so at least for myself, I think it'd be beneficial to, and I'd probably be willing to do it process-wise, just throw out a motion, and it would be something like move to add the position of elected county exec to the draft charter that's being written. We run around, call the votes, and see where we are, and we pick a fork. Like you said, it's all really draft until the final charter is approved.
And this is just language we're talking about.
Right. But at least for myself, I think it'd be beneficial here to kind of call the question and pick a fork in the road.
If we had a straw vote, what I was thinking is we could just have a show of hands of how many, what I see, and maybe I have misread this, but I see perhaps needing to do two languages because it seems to be fairly evenly divided about which way to go on this. But if there's no objection, rather than a formal motion and all those sorts of things.
You want me to go ahead and maybe record it on the whiteboard here?
Well, we'll just count.
Yeah.
What I was suggesting is maybe just have county executive and then county manager, and I could just show the results of the vote, and then the public will see that visually.
Oh, the public will see visually.
Nan, perhaps along the lines you're talking, maybe we should have three votes. Those that would like to further discussion on elected executive, those that would like further discussion on having it appointed, and those that would like further discussion on the hybrid solution that's been proposed?
Mm-hmm. I kind of had the reading that those that liked appointed were already kind of liking the hybrid even better, but maybe I read that wrong.
Well, Madam Chair, just to clarify, I guess I could disagree. I really think the question of should we have an and that's probably how I would phrase it, was should we have an elected county exec? I think if that passes or fails, I think that informs the follow-up votes. So if, for example, then we go down the path of an elected, or we go down appointed, then you can talk about kind of the structure of that commission and things like that. But that's just me and Ed.
I guess my concern is that there are a lot of folks at this table that are very softly leaning in either direction, and what that formal motion does to me is cut off the others. I know that our bylaws only call for a simple majority on these important issues, but it would be my great hope that we could get a much stronger consensus on something as important as this, rather than just 8 for one and 7 for the other. But that's just me.
Well, and speaking for myself, I think everyone knows I've staked out since the beginning. I'm for an elected county executive. That said, and I said this before, Freeholder Rivers' proposal talking about, we've talked about things like a firewall, things like a supermajority for hiring and firing of department heads and stopping the commission from kind of meddling with staff, as may be the case now. I could be depending on how that went, I could be really happy with the end result, even if it wasn't an elected county exec.
So that's what I'm trying to leave open for possibility, is if we don't have a strong consensus either way, then we could instruct Mr. Sills to draft 2 possible solutions, and so we could actually see what those might look like. And then that would give the members a better idea of how effective they thought each of the tools would be. Would that person, I mean, we're talking administrator elected, would that person not only have veto power, but line veto power, or no veto power at all? All those possibilities could come up, but then you have stopped progress on the other potential solution. I may be dead wrong.
Nan, perhaps something along what you're talking about. I don't want to stop discussion on the 2 different options, just like you're talking about. There's a lot more aspects to what goes into the county executive versus appointed that we've discussed in broad terms, but we haven't approved the details. But perhaps if we take a straw vote on who favors one model over the other,
Exactly.
This might be a chance for you as the chair to get other members involved. Those that favor a county executive, maybe we'd let them divide up into a subcommittee and come up with the finer details that they would like to see in that, to come back and inform the whole body as to what their full proposal looks like. What is the veto power? What is this person responsible for? And the same with those that want to see an appointed county manager. What is their vision for the board then? And how does that work? Do they want a supermajority?
Yes, Ms. Pike.
Thank you, Nan. I agree with moving forward with a straw vote at the soonest time, because we're going to get mired in this, and this subject could fill up all of our time, and then we won't save the county the $100,000 and get our work done on time.
Thank you.
So I think we have to move on from this, because there are other important issues in the charter.
And it's interesting that I had entertained the idea a couple meetings back of having 2 subcommittees writing different ways. I was told that could be very divisive. So let's first take a straw vote. For those that are...
No. This is probably a superfluous question or statement, but I'm assuming we're not talking any longer about an appointed county administrator like we have.
Yes.
Maybe the only one, because we're not taking a vote, first of all, to get us to that point, whether we're even separating the power,
we had a
who stands where.
very strong consensus on separation. It's just how to achieve it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
So, okay, I just wanted to make that point so that we're.
But you are an important one.
Because I will be voting on this, but still leaning.
Yeah, let the record show. Yeah, okay.
Because I don't want to be accused of being flip-flopping again when I do place a vote for this.
I would never do that again. So, those of you that are interested in an appointed county administrator, much like the hybrid presented by Ms. Rivers, would you indicate by raising your hand? And those of you that would are leaning toward an elected county executive, would you raise your hand? Five. Temple? Did you get Temple?
There's 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't even count.
We just don't
today.
have Joe and Gary here. Yeah.
The math.
It's all right. I've had a lot of coffee this morning.
Yes, Ms. Pike.
So if I'm reading the numbers right, even if going back to the last meeting when Freeholder Zarelli and Freeholder Lucas expressed
elected.
Yes, so just letting the record show that even if they were here, there would be a majority of appointed.
Now there is a majority. Is 9-6 a big enough consensus, or would you like to see the minority option at least get some draft coverage too? Yes, Mr. Bolt.
I think, and I'll go back to probably Peter's,
Will you go back to what?
to what Peter said 2 weeks ago, is that as I looked at the last charter that went to the voters, the problem that went down is you had minority reports, and then that surfaced to the election, and then it became very divisive. And so, once again, what we need is, let's talk it out right here and now, rather than, I believe, to have this minority report. So.
Mr. Maines.
I just wanted to question, Kelly, will this draft that comes back, are we going to vote again? Like, will that include the 5 commissioners with 1 at large? Would it include the supermajority vote? I mean, for when I'm making this decision, that's what I'd like to include in supporting the county administrator.
So in lieu of me answering that question, that's a question to be answered by this group.
Okay. I just was
Right now, we're more at the 30,000-foot level,
Go
just
more
saying
detail.
executive or manager.
Okay.
It looks like manager. I do think that in order to reasonably flesh that out in a written form so that I embark on actually drafting the charter on your behalf, I would appreciate some input as to how many commissioners and
That's
also,
the next thing on the agenda.
Also
That's what
election by district and
Funny you would
whatnot.
bring that up.
Great. Yes. Just making sure.
Yes, Temple.
Speaking as a member of the minority, to respond to, I agree with Mark, and I agree that I want us as a body to put forth a charter that we do have really strong consensus on. And so, speaking as a representative of the minority, I would be looking for, if we can talk about what will go into the county manager so that those of us who are leaning towards executive can feel more comfortable that our needs are being met.
Do you want to do that up front, or would you like to see what we can come up with and then have that discussion of changes and things that would make you more comfortable at that point when you see what's there, or would you like to do it up front today?
I'm open to seeing what's drafted. I can say that, while I have the mic, I can say that some of my concerns are being sure that there is a supermajority for key hiring positions, key hiring decisions, and possibly some other votes where a supermajority would be required. And what exactly that firewall is going to look like is just a key issue for me.
Would you be hamstringing the appointed manager or administrator? I can see the supermajority for that position, but if you're going to have legislative approval of any of that person's appointments, I wouldn't think that person would have to hit 4 out of 5 for other department heads. Is that what you mean?
No, it isn't.
No,
and
okay.
This is something where I don't know exactly what specific votes we could be talking about, but major decisions by the legislative body, not just hiring the executive or the manager, but are there other places where perhaps there's precedent where we can do that, where there might be very sensitive, very important decisions that we, as a community, would benefit from having supermajority?
I do not know, but we can look into that.
I would agree with Temple on that. I think it really gets down to some of those key decision points and the checks and balances. If this group does lean towards the county manager form, is that supermajority acts as that checks and balance, so that because even under a county manager form, there's nothing that stops a manager from hiring their friend as a department head. And I'm not picking on anybody. I've seen it in other communities, and it's. That's not good governing, but some of those behaviors, whatever structure you pick, you're not going to necessarily stop, but you can put more roadblocks in to make it that much more difficult. And I'm probably leaning like Temple. Once I see some draft language, I'm not going to sit here and undercut 9 other individuals. It's whatever we come to a consensus with, then that's where we're going to move.
Okay.
I think most of us around this table, if not all of us, are bigger people than that. So
We're pretty big, all right.
Hey.
Not in size. Randy Mueller.
Yes. Getting back to your original question about if we should maybe continue doing work on advancing both these ideas now that we've kind of seen where everyone is. Again, just speaking for myself, as one of the members in the minority, I don't see the need to. Of course, anyone can always come back to this group up until we approve the final charter. But I think there's a point where you count the votes and move on.
So we certainly could do a lot of amending after something is written. But what you're saying is don't write to at this point.
Yeah, I don't see the need to at this point. I think it's more about, okay, if that's the road we're going to go down, how do we make that work for everyone?
Okay. Pat Gelada.
Yes. As I look around this table, I can see some pretty good wordsmiths. I also would like to see something in writing. As far as what the county executive would do, hiring buddies, we could write into the charter that if the commissioners are not satisfied with his work, a supermajority will fire him as well as hire him.
Oh, yeah.
And so there is a control that way as well. And
True.
we know that's the way it is with city management, is that, you know how many votes you've got.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would like to see, as a minority member, let me see what is in writing, and then we can change it from there.
Well, one of the reasons I pled with you the last 3 weeks, 3 meetings, to really listen to each other is that very reason.
Exactly.
Want to make sure, whichever way it goes, we can incorporate as many, at least somewhat, solutions to these concerns with the opposite approach. So at this point, I would ask Kelly on your behalf to, now that he's out of his deathbed, having been sick for 9 days or more, you're almost well, so get your pen going and see what you can come up with. And we will try to get that draft out to you a few days before our next meeting, so you're not going to hit it cold when you come in the door, because I know that certain people are authors in this group and could... And plus the concerns, we could deal with that more efficiently if you reviewed that before. All righty. Oh, yes, Mr. Mueller.
Yes. Madam Chair, I suggest that we probably continue with the straw votes on the 30,000-foot level. It's always easier to respond to something that's actually written.
Yes.
And so, to move this process along, can we continue that process of, do we elect 5 commissioners?
Well, that's our next discussion.
Okay.
It's funny you would bring that up. Once again, I want to take a 10 to 15 minute break, 15 minutes max, and say that through. I wanted the county to, through our little fund, to buy coffee for you this morning. Kelly checked with Starbucks yesterday, and they said we don't take purchase orders. And the finance people at the county said you don't buy anything without a purchase order. And so he was successful in the fact that the folks at Starbucks, which Starbucks was that?
It was the one at the Salmon Creek Fred Meyer complex.
Salmon Creek Fred Meyer said, we will donate this coffee. So this morning, the coffee is donated from Starbucks in Salmon Creek. My daughter Chris has once again supplied you with bagels, cream cheese, English muffins, and butter. We will take 15 minutes. We maybe have to figure out, we may want to put a cup back here for donations by the coffee, so that we can buy coffee without getting in trouble with the county for the need for a purchase order not working. So let's reconvene at 25 minutes after, and thank you very much. The legislative body. by figuring out how many districts that you want to have. Electing by district or at large or both, a combination, partisan or nonpartisan. There's a briefing paper that Mr. Sills provided you on election of legislative body and related discussion of legislative body size that you have already received, and anyone who is in the audience, there are copies in the back of the room, and anyone at home, go to the website.
Wow, that caught me off guard. I'm not sure I remember exactly, but I believe it is www.freeholder.clark.wa.
You know what it is? I just remembered.
You remember, Mary?
www.clark.wa.gov. The /freeholder doesn't work on my computers, but if you go to that main website, look to the right, there is a box that refers to freeholders. Click on that, and it opens the whole thing up every time, for at least for me. So that's what I would recommend. Anyway, all those materials are on there for your late night viewing. Alrighty. And then a different kind of side issue on the districts is we need to get those districts as soon as we figure out if we want 4, if we want, and 1 at large, if we want 5, however many. We need to be able to give the GIS folks as quickly as possible walking papers on that one, 4 or 5, because we'll determine in a minute if there's any interest in more than that or less than that. They need some time to work their magic with the numbers as apolitically as possible. RCW 29A 76010 is about the districting. And I thought I would let you know what the considerations are, because if there's more considerations than that, we will want to specify those to the GIS folks. So I won't go into that right now because we'll have our conversation first. But I would really like to get to that second step today, even if it's...
Nan, before you move on, could you specify why we need to give that information to the GIS people?
All right. So there were 2 basic options on, well, there's probably more than 2, basic options on this districting issue. One was to be clear up front. You're in precinct whatever, you would be in this district, in the charter itself, to start out. These are the precincts that make up each of these new districts. There was the feeling by some that it should be done up front, and others that, oh no, don't tell them that, just set up a system for that designation after they decide if they want a charter or not. The problem with that is I've been working with folks figuring backwards, and if we wait till after the election, so you're looking at the first of 2015, in order for those new districts to have people running for office, they have to file by the 11th to the 15th of May. So you got to go backwards from that and say the elections department says that they need time to update their records prior to filing, and so they need it by 3/31 of 15. And then you figure out the process for later on when this districting has to happen again. You need a commission. You need that, then the report from the commission reviewed by the county council. There's no way that they can get that process done in 3 months. So you're back to, I believe, the more transparent process anyway, which is for us to, as apolitically as possible, get the GIS results, have a subcommittee made up of a balance of political sways, and bring it back to this board to see that it's fair and it's done by state law standards, unless you want them further refined. So that's what that's all about.
So are you saying that this is just to facilitate a future election or to inform this body as to what those districts might look like?
This is to make it possible to, when we propose the this charter to the folks, that those districts are defined as part of the process. And GIS and others need time. So if we want to get done this spring, we need to get going on that. So that was just a heads up of another pragmatic solution.
Just to inform, we can come up with a preliminary what we envision it. The GIS department, working with them, will come up with, according to state law, what it'll look like.
We try to stay hands off. We set the parameters. Well, I'll go into it right now. I was going to do it later, but the plan shall be consistent with the following criteria. This is what they say for councils, commissioner districts, etc. The first item is nearly equal in population, as much as possible. Some places provide a little bit of room for growth of certain areas if you expect certain districts to be growing a lot faster than others. Each district shall be compact as possible. Each district shall consist of geographically contiguous areas. Population data may not be used for purposes of favoring or disfavoring any racial group or political party. To the extent feasible, all of this needs to coincide with existing recognized natural boundaries and shall, to the extent possible, preserve existing communities of related and mutual interest, are basically the basic ones.
Just to clarify the process, though, do we, as a board, just say we're going to have 5 members or 7 members, and we hand it off to somebody else to determine what the districts are?
The GIS folks would run the numbers because that would be totally apolitical. And then we would review that, and this body as a whole would determine yes or no, and then that would become part of the actual charter that goes to the voters.
If I can just
go
maybe
ahead.
add a little bit of additional information for you.
I don't know if your mic is working as well as mine.
Is it working?
It is. That's good.
This is actually a process that we're used to doing with our GIS department. Commissioner Bolt, when you were on the Board of Commissioners, you'll recall every decennial census triggers this action within the county because our population is expanding so rapidly. We're always subject to redrawing our current commissioner district boundaries every 10 years. And so our GIS people know how to do this. They've got it figured out, and they have a system for doing it so that we meet all of those criteria. That's one thing. Secondly, the important emphasis here is to draw the district boundary lines, which is not included in the RCW, so that you don't split precinct boundaries.
Oh, that was the most important thing I forgot. Thank you, Kelly. We will totally foul up the GIS folks if we break up precincts as already. I'm
Exactly.
sorry. Very good.
And any county would be facing that hurdle. And so, frankly, if you want to see a good example of how this occurred in real time when a county went through the charter process and expanded beyond 3 commissioners, just look at the example in your binder of Pierce County. And what they did is they simply identified the commissioner districts, and they added in a list of all those precincts by number so that you could easily identify which precinct was in which new district. And the other thing I would add is that it is important, I think, for this board to bring that kind of clarity into the charter if you choose to expand the number of commissioner districts, because the Constitution requires that the new government approved, if it does get approved by the electorate, be up and running within 6 months maximum. So the more clarity you bring to the process, the more able we are to meet those constitutional requirements.
So you're saying if this got approved in December and it does, or
in November,
and it does increase the number of commissioners, they would have to hold a special election to have that number of commissioners within 6 months?
That's one of the scenarios.
They have to file by then, don't they?
Well, the whole issue of filing and running for office, all of the, and running a campaign for office, all of those become issues that really get constrained in terms of time. That's not to say you wouldn't have the option of trying to integrate into the charter scenarios for later elections. But again, it's a question of whether you're bringing clarity more or less into the process.
I think the goal would be the regular November election, and even if we have to put it for shorter terms or something to get the stagger right later, this whole thing would be premised on folks being able to file by May of 2015 for those open seats.
So we can probably address all those issues when it comes to discussing transition.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now the floor
Can I
is...
just interrupt to ask one more question? So if we hand this off to the GIS, Kelly, since we have gone through this process before, how soon before they can come back to us and give us an idea of what that might look like?
So you're not operating in a vacuum here. They're fully aware that they're probably going to be asked to at least analyze this idea of an expansion. So they're already preparing to do that. And we have an absolutely all-star person on our staff named Ken Perot who leads these efforts. And he's already, we've had that conversation, so I think he's already taken the initiative to look at how that would work out. So
They've had the
the answer is
conversation,
yes.
but I was uncomfortable with anything proceeding until this group agreed to the process. Yes, Randy.
Just wanted to chime in here because Ken at the County GIS Department has also helped us at my work with the Port of Ridgefield when we went through redistricting. In that case, we actually found that kind of the less direction you give them, the better, and you're more guaranteed of some non-political results coming back. The only instructions, I think, were obviously the legal ones about them being equal in size, trying to keep things as contiguous and use as many straight lines as possible so you don't get kind of goofy boundaries. And the other one was, of course, not having the existing commissioners moved out of their districts. So, that which is also called out in kind of the rules. And they did great work. And they turned that around pretty quick. So I think once if we come out of here tonight saying we think there should be X commissioner districts, they should do that.
And they are willing to run a couple if we haven't totally determined if we're going to have one at large and 4 by district and all that. But they're willing to run. It would be by RCW 29A 76010. I was just saying that if there's more. And you're probably right, the less we meddle, the better. But if we were determined to add to the requirements, we'd need to let them know up front rather than saying after they did all the work, oh, but by the way, we really like this more.
Just finishing up on there, though, if we're asking for a couple options, like one with 4 commissioner districts because the 5th is countywide, and the other option being 5 commissioner districts, that's one thing. Myself, I would actually kind of discourage if we say pick 5, bring me a couple options for 5, because I think then we're looking at, then it becomes, okay, which is better for my particular
and
interest
we don't
group
want to
or
go
not.
there. Yeah. So what I was talking about options is just the raw number 4 and 5 if we don't get to that point. But no, we don't want to politicize this. So the floor is now open for your viewpoints on increasing the number of legislative body to how many districts elected by district or at large or both. We do know that we have instructed Kelly Sills to look at that hybrid manager approach for his writing, which would require 4 and 1, but whatever your opinions are. And also the question of partisan, nonpartisan. Does that take care of the major concerns, I think?
Yeah, the partisan, nonpartisan, frankly, is not a concern for me at this time in terms of writing this. I don't think you need to come to some sort of decision on that. I'm thinking of this more structurally. That's more of a political question, which you don't have to deal with at this time.
But it's I've noticed a tendency in the group that in a lot of people's minds, all of this kind of fits together. So whatever you're thinking, just like we did in the last segment, let's throw it out there and see where people are leaning. Yes, Mr. Maines.
Oh, I was just going to jump right in.
Do so.
All right. 5 commissioners, 4 districts, 1 at large who would be the chair and represent the body.
Second.
Yes, Mr. Wilson.
I like to go early. It gives me plenty of time to flip-flop later. Speaking as a businessman, one of the most important things the business community looks for in their government is predictability. And I've wrestled with the whole issue of 3 versus 5. Is 5 going to represent better than 3? Is 7 the right number? All this. And I keep coming back to the same point that 5 is a good number. From election to election, when you have 3, one person can totally flip the whole constitution of the county government, for good or bad or indifferent. But it just is. And with 5, there's a little bit more stability, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But now, and I've thought 7 was just totally out of the question. That just seems overly vague. But Temple brought up a very good point, and Paul echoed it, or an idea that I think might have some merit. I'd have to think about it a little more. But in some cases where we may want a supermajority for certain types of appointments or certain policy issues, and a supermajority with 5 is 4.
Right.
Now that's very difficult to get. So now all of a sudden you start looking in that particular case, as we go along, something just to keep in mind in our deliberations, that if we start to feel like there's certain things we may want a supermajority for, and that's important to us in this charter, we may want to start looking at that 7, because 5 out of 7 just seems a more doable deal than 4 out of 5.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. They did want to make it really tough, though, and 4 out of 5.
And I think either way is really tough.
Really tough.
4 out of 5 might seem impossible.
Yeah.
5 out of 7. Well, granted. They're both probably easier than 3. But anyway, that's something. Yeah. And I don't know that it would make it easier or makes much of a difference, but that might be something just to keep in the back of our minds.
Val Ogden?
Looking at King County, which of course is much larger than we are, and have the more commissioners, I think 5 makes much more sense for us, because I think that's doable, and I think it will give us the balance that we need.
Okay. That would be either 5 or 4, depending if you were going 4 and 1 at large. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, Pat Gelada.
Yeah, I was laughing with Jim, because a supermajority is always difficult to get. Whether you're going 5 out of 7, or you're going 4 out of 5, or you're going 9 out of 13, you're always going to have trouble. So you want to be very careful in the charter where you require a supermajority. I think that 5 is a doable number for a county board. For a city board, I would say 7 seems to work well. But I think in this case, I would go for 5, and we can discuss whether 4 or 1 at large later.
Okay.
But I will go for the 5, and not to worry about how hard it will be to get a supermajority. If you've got a good issue, and you know it's a good issue, or a good candidate, then you should have no trouble getting that supermajority. If you don't, and there's a good reason you can't get that supermajority.
Ann Rivers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I join the chorus of folks who think that 5 is good, and particularly mindful of Peter Silliman's comments earlier about the natural checks and balance that come with a willful group of 5 people.
Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. Yes, Mr. Bolt.
Thank you. I would agree with 5 commissioners. I think one thing that is good for us to understand is that because of GM growth management and annexations, there will be less for the county to do. And I think as King County found out that they reduced some of their county commissioners because they have less to do. In fact, they don't have much at all to do anymore in King County.
They're much more urban.
So I would, the 4 districts and the 1 member at large is, I tend not to go, I would like to have 5 districts personally, but if we went to the member at large that was a chair and, I don't know if it's a figurehead, I've always said you're the figurehead if you screw up the most, so in which I've been the figurehead, unfortunately. But so I think that's one thing that we could look at, But right now, 5.
Okay, Mr. Moeller.
I'll also add my voice to the chorus of 5 commissioners. I favor a partisan commissioner board and a nonpartisan at large.
Okay.
And the reason why is simple: that I don't think politics is a dirty word. Yeah. This is how. Even though we had a nonpartisan board on the city council, we all knew where people leaned and what their proclivities were. So it didn't really matter, except that that's where people learn about being a partisan. And I personally, I think that county government is okay to learn about that.
So what is the advantage then of having the chair or figurehead elected nonpartisan, if partisan is fine?
It adds, because it is it's a nod to the nonpartisan aspects of the board. It's an idea that perhaps things can work across party lines, that you don't have to be a partisan all the time. There are certain things that people decide based on parties, and that's okay. That's the way we're set up. But it's also okay that we not do that, and that we get the business of the county done. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think the chair should represent, is getting the business of the county done.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
I'm sure I can speak to this issue. I've had a position all along. I'm one of those people that does favor 5 commissioners, all elected by district. For me, it's been, part of it's simply just a numbers game. Right now, an at-large election requires you to get 100,000 people to vote for you to get a position on our county board. If we change that to election by district, as Mr. Chuck Green provided this table, he shows you in his numbers, they'll actually represent about 86,000 people in this county if we have 5 commissioners. But the actual number of people required to get voted in, based on registered voters and turnout, is around 20,000 people. So that, to me, makes our commissioners elected by district much more accessible, much more accountable to voters in their specific areas or their specific district. So that, to me, was part of the issue, bringing commissioners closer to the electorate. Also, you'll notice just based on those numbers, if you ranked our counties by state based on population, it does decrease the number of people per commissioner, but we still stay about the same rank, so we're still right there in the middle. But I still think having more commissioners, meaning more accountability to individual voters, is a good direction to be going. One of the things that has been brought up is, will 5 commissioners have enough to do based on, 3 commissioners working full-time? Would 5 commissioners be part-time? And my observation is that they will find work to do. If you look at the
That's dangerous.
Well, if you look at the other counties and you look at the workload that they have, it's usually measured. You can usually correlate how much work do they actually have by how much staff they have underneath them. So just increasing the number of commissioners doesn't necessarily reflect an increase in expense, because how much staff does each individual person have underneath them to support the actual work they are doing? I think that's more reflective of the demand or the workload that they have. Talking about Jim Moore brought up partisan versus nonpartisan. Being a Republican does not make you partisan. Being a Democrat does not make you partisan. So we might call it a nonpartisan position because a lot of the political positions you might have as a Republican aren't really affected by your position in county government. Having said that, having a position on the ballot that is partisan and having you declare whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, to me, is informative to the voters of which direction you lean. Are you fiscal conservative? Are you more liberal? The voters want to know that, and I think they're informed by who you associate with. So in that respect, I like to see the positions remain labeled as partisan, even though that doesn't make the person act partisan, or their role might not be partisan. So I just see it purely as informative. And let's see. I like what people have said about, requiring a quorum and how much it might be hard to have a supermajority. I think there will be increased checks and balances, like I've said, just by increasing the number of commissioners. One of the things our existing commissioners have brought up, the problem with having only 3 county commissioners, and we've kind of discussed this as really, is this an issue or not, is if any of them, two of them try to get together and talk about county business, that has to be an official meeting. They can't have an informal conversation about it, which means it's open to the public, everybody can see what they're talking about. Some people think, well, that's not a big deal, but I'd like to point out that even the framers of our Constitution, when they had the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, they recognized the importance to be able to throw out ideas and have informal conversations about ideas, especially and I think the people that are dealing with our county government on a day-to-day basis should be able to have that informal conversation and not have it be in a formal meeting. I think they can be taken out of context. They can be just throwing something out there and say, well, what do you think about this idea? It just came to my mind. If that's in a formal meeting, people might take that to the press and make you look foolish. So in that respect, I think there's an advantage to having 5 in that you are allowed to have that informal conversation, just so you can bounce that idea off of your friend and say, well, what's your first impression of this? Rather than being a formal conversation with the Columbian right there taking notes. So I see an advantage to that as well.
I'm hearing a lot of consensus over the 5. Maybe I could ask if there's anyone here who would like to have 3 or 7. I don't think anyone has proposed more than 7, and they're not comfortable with 5. Would you please speak up? Because if not, I think we'll go with the 5 or 4 and 1.
I would add that I do favor 5 elected by district. If we want to talk about at-large, I might favor additional people elected at large, but I would like to see 5 people elected by district. That's my position.
Yes, Ms. Pike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also favor 5 commissioners, but I think that they should all be partisan, and I'm okay with 1 at large being the chair, but I think we struggle with voter turnout in this county, and I think voters have an easier time identifying with a party label, quite frankly, and I think that helps voter turnout, speaking to what Peter said. So that would be my preference.
It's it's still a 5. It's a 4 and 1, but it would be all partisan. I would like a straw vote if there's no one else that wants to talk for 7. Oh, there's Mr. Dennis.
Right. I'm for 5, and I just have a more of a process question.
Mm-hmm.
I remember years ago when Mr. Pridemore stepped down, and there was a process for trying to do an appointment. Because it was partisan, then the appointment became a partisan appointment.
Right.
If you have a nonpartisan commissioner, how does that process work?
Good question.
And you don't have to answer that right now if you don't know the answer. I would like to know that answer at some point if we're really going to entertain having someone nonpartisan. I agree with many of the comments around the table. I don't think being partisan necessarily dictates party politics. I think it's the behavior of the individual that dictates whether that happens or not. Whether you identify with one party or another, I think most people really want to elect good people. And at this day and age are just tired of some of the political behaviors that occur. Whether we go 4 and 1 at large or 5 districts, I'm open to that. I don't think it would be a bad thing to have one person at large. But definitely, I think having 5 commissioners would be good just for this county.
Kelly had a partial answer for you, I think, on one of those.
Well, actually, Chris, you may have more understanding of it, but generally speaking, you're correct. If there's a vacancy that occurs in a current commissioner position, say a death or something like that, or a resignation, then I believe the party that person represented basically submits 3 candidates, and then the other 2 commissioners go through deliberation to select one of the 3 for the remaining period of that person's term. The process under a charter form of government, whether it's a partisan position or a nonpartisan position, because it would essentially establish a new process outside of general law, would be whatever you wanted it to be. So typically they do address issues of vacancy in the charter. And so if you knew that potential could come up for a nonpartisan chair position or whatever you wanted to call that, chief executive position, you could have a process that's spelled out differently, or you could really do whatever you want. So it's entirely up to you. It's clay in your hands.
Mr. Mueller.
That answered what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. The thing that's interesting is coming into this process, I have always been an advocate for nonpartisan local governments, probably because 25 years ago, the reason I never ran for commissioner is the parties were trying to give me a litmus test, and I was not interested in taking any litmus tests for a county position that had nothing to do with the litmus test. But I think it sounds very clear to me that there's really not a lot of interest in changing these positions from partisan to nonpartisan. Is that a fair reading of where you folks are coming from, except for Mr. Moeller, for the one?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I don't think I'd characterize myself that way. I guess I'd agree with Freeholder Pike in regards to the fact that, well, they should all be either partisan or nonpartisan. I believe the idea of a nonpartisan chair and partisan members, when they're all essentially voting on the same issues, serves to probably confuse things. It doesn't necessarily. I see a lot of problems with how that would work. Where I would differ is I would make them all nonpartisan, whereas some would make them all partisan. But I certainly don't believe in mixing the two.
Any other viewpoints on? So, do we have consensus on 5? Yes. A good, strong consensus that 5 is a reasonable number. So that takes care of. Sills is going to the easel. 5 is,
Do we want to show of hands for that?
Show of hands.
Yeah, let's do
well, I was going to, but I decided, as long as you're bobbing your heads and not saying, no, no, no.
Head bobbing. Unless we're all the same
And
where I probably.
Strabo, yeah, we want another Strabo. What about, so we've got 5. Since we have instructed Mr. Sills to write the 4-and-1 approach to an appointed administrator and legislative body, do you want the GIS folks to do both 4 and 5 in case you decide not to go that route? Or
Sure.
if we could
I'd favor that. I think it would just help inform us what those boundaries might look like. And that
well, we
might-
may not know by the time you decide for sure, but yeah.
I think it's worth doing.
Yeah.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay. So you're comfortable with us requesting that the GIS folks run both 4 and 5? That? No, that's very good. I heard some talk about partisan versus nonpartisan. It seems like the consensus is, except for Randy and Nan, that the consensus is that they should all be partisan. Well, Mr. Mueller thought it might be a hybrid, but any other comments before we might take a straw vote on that?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
have we, I don't know that we've heard from everyone
No.
on that.
I
so
would
that
love to hear from everyone, but it looked like some people were bobbing like they just agreed with who. But I would love, you have something?
No, if we're going to do a straw vote, that would be great. I think it'd be beneficial for everyone and for the public to
Yeah.
know where people were on that.
I agree. Does anybody else have comments on partisan versus nonpartisan? Mr. Silliman.
I can speak to that issue specifically. A couple things that might, well, a couple of things that come to mind when we talk about partisan and nonpartisan. There's two aspects to it. One of them is the way we were elected. One of the reasons they chose to make this a nonpartisan position is because of the requirements of having a primary for partisan races to whittle it down to 2
Right.
competitors or candidates versus having a primary that's nonpartisan where you can have an open slate of candidates,
Top
not
2.
have.
Top 2, regardless of party.
Yeah, it is now.
Yeah.
Because it can be 2 Rs.
Well, we
now.
didn't have to have a primary for
No,
this race.
we said we wouldn't. But
Right.
for that, we would have, if we had 3
But
candidates.
isn't part of the requirement for a partisan position to have a primary to make it a top 2 race?
This was more of a matter of timing than about whether or not we wanted to have a primary, but about getting the election in, I believe, is why they chose not to have a primary.
So
We would need a primary regardless of party, because now you can have 2 Rs or 2 Ds end up running against each other. Go ahead,
Or
Kelly.
2 nonpartisan, if it was that.
Wouldn't that be a glorious day? They don't usually get there.
So actually, I believe Freeholder Silliman is correct, and I think it's born of citizen initiative, and so it would trump the charter. The nonpartisan positions, I believe, do not necessitate a primary, but the partisan positions do necessitate a primary, and Chris,
City
you may
Council,
have a better opinion, but I don't believe that a charter can change that from an election process perspective.
Because I know city council is nonpartisan, yet we've had many primaries.
Yes.
Oh, sure, you can have a primary for nonpartisan, but I don't think that there's a legal requirement for that.
I see.
For a partisan
I see.
election, I
Okay,
believe there is
different
a
point.
legal requirement for a primary.
So it might not be an issue, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
The other thing I said before is it's purely informative when this isn't really a position where, like Nan, you pointed out, a lot of the things the parties stand for aren't really addressed by this position. But it is informative for the voters because a lot of times they elect people based on who they associate with.
Yes.
So it's informative in that way. And if you truly want to be an independent, you don't have to declare a party affiliation. If
No, but you
if somebody
lose.
wants to run as a non-party, If somebody wants to run as a nonpartisan candidate, they can write down that they have no party affiliation, or run as an independent, or run as none. So.
Theoretically, that is true. Yes, Mr. Mueller.
I guess I'd encourage us to not do a straw vote on this today.
Okay.
Because it wasn't on the agenda, and I think there's a lot of folks that would potentially love to chime in on this.
I thought I had it on the agenda, so
I don't
there you
think
go.
the partisan,
Okay.
nonpartisan is.
Yeah, and we don't need a straw vote anyway. I was just seeing what kind of consensus we had on these issues.
Right. Because I can think of, I imagine the political parties might want to chime in. They probably want to come and comment on that and add some perspective. Of course, myself as an avid nonpartisan who thinks the parties do more harm than good, I would love, and I think I'm probably not the only one. There would be some of those folks that would want to come and talk about that as well. So,
all right.
I think talking about it's great, but
yeah,
we should notice that and let everyone who might want to chime in on that.
And following in line with that, in anticipation of this discussion, I have prepared, or at least drafted in near final form, one of your topic briefings about partisan versus nonpartisan. So I think after Nan's review, I can get that out to this board relatively quickly, probably Monday.
One thing that I was educated about when running for this position in Sense is that at first I called it the lazy voter syndrome, but I'm not going to be judgmental about that. But I was informed by many that rather than try to find out about each individual, they do get a lot of guidance by that R or D after their name. And whether that's lazy or just efficient, it's a fact. So I agree with that. All right. That is an interesting conversation. We got what we needed, which was some walking papers about, for the GIS folks. We'll do 4 and 5. And pretty darn good consensus. We've got the 5. That's obvious. And a little more discussion about the district versus at large, but it looks like that's kind of going to at district, except for that one person who would be at large. So that's all good information. And Mr. Wilson?
I don't know. I've heard any discussion, too, about another possibility of having 3 districts and 2 at large.
Well, that's another possibility.
Alone and having 2. It may complicate who the chairman is, but that's something that's going to have to be decided down the road anyway, because if you end up 5 districts, you're going to have to figure out how one becomes chairman anyway.
We got the walking papers for 4 and 5, but not for keeping it the same. Is there...
Do we want to further discuss the idea of at-large and what number that might be before the end of this meeting to give additional direction?
I was just under the impression that there was a pretty strong consensus that everybody pretty much liked district. As I said, I have had concerns about district by district because of the parochial infighting for various areas rather than for the good of the whole. And folks being more concerned about their 20,000 voting constituents than about the good of the whole. But I got the reading. We had strong consensus here that people like by district. Is that not? Well, yes. You want to talk that next time too?
I think it would be good for us to continue talking about that. But so. To echo what Mr. Wilson said, I've had some good conversations with folks in the community about keeping 3 districts but having 2 at large. It does increase us to 5 commissioners, which we have. We do have consensus as something that we want. But it's an interesting idea because it would mean that then every voter in the county would get to vote on the majority of the board. And so some of the concerns about smaller jurisdictions and turf could be alleviated by having that. I think it could be an interesting discussion.
Yes. That is a good idea. The good thing about that is if we stuck with 3, the GIS folks don't need to work on that anyway. So, yes.
Madam Chair, something that you just said stirred a thought. I heard you say that it would be about 20,000 voting constituents. And I guess I'd like to make sure that it's voted up by population as a whole instead of just voters, because when we take our oath, we're committed to representing all the people,
Yeah.
whether they voted for us or not, or whether they vote or
Right.
not. So I really want to make sure that we're...
I was just saying that the pressure on someone who's up for office next year, lots of times the focus is more on the folks that are most likely to go out and vote. That's all I was saying.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I threw out that number several times, the 20,000 people to get elected, based on number here, 86,000 people in a district,
And the
based on how many registered voters, average turnout, dividing by 5. So it would average about 20,000 votes required for a person to get elected in that district.
Oh, okay. But we have nearly 500,000 people in our county now, so we'd really be representing about, if we had 5 commissioners, about 100,000 people.
The number's about 86,000 people per district.
Okay.
At this point, yeah.
And frankly, even 20,000 could be optimistic. It just depends on the election, because if you look around the table here, each of you did represent a district in a 3-district scenario. And even in that context, Freeholder Rivers gained the most votes and didn't even achieve 13,000, I don't believe, district-wide. So it just depends on the election.
Of course, there were a whole lot of us running. That may have impacted it, too. So now you know that before the next meeting, we'll have a draft out to you about the separation of powers, an appointed administrator-manager model. We will continue our conversation about, we won't probably go back to the number of districts too much, but in honor of Mr. Wilson's concern, we'll talk about that again. And the other 2 items that we talked about, partisan, nonpartisan, and by district or at large. Is that, you're good with that? All right.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Would we be, just like today, we pretty much kind of made a decision on the elected versus appointed. Do you see the next meeting, us making that decision at the next meeting? So that's really where we're...
Yes. In fact, on the agenda, it will be kind of a decision item. At least there again, straw vote. If you want to try to put this whole package together, see how it fits before you take a good vote. But I would see we at least have a straw vote outcome on all those 3 issues we were just...
Just speaking for myself, it is beneficial to kind of have the kind of the multiple touches on the subject. Yes. where folks know and it is noticed. Council members are familiar with that because that's what they usually do with them. With their work.
Good policy. So, for the good of the order, a quick question about what do you think of the idea of putting a coffee mug out by the thing, and we don't even try to get a purchase order, find someplace that'll take a purchase order. We just get the coffee and we pay for it ourselves.
Sounds good.
Is that a good solution? Thumbs up in the back. Good. The last meeting in March, we're hoping to go on the road to North County. And we have a couple of options. We can either schedule it as just regular public input, but longer in case there's folks that, and the same will be true of a trip out to East County, longer but a similar public participation thing. Or we could have more of an open forum with whoever showed up and modify our meeting a bit. So I'd like you to be thinking about that. We're going to be scheduling that for, if we can work it out, the first meeting in April then would be out in East County, just for a heads up. The the folks that spoke to us before about a more creative public process are working on a couple of ideas for you about how you might incorporate maybe 50 minutes of their process downstairs if they could get the Dragonfly Cafe to open, and then have a regular meeting, and we would participate downstairs if we chose to. Or other folks have felt that sounds like a good process, but it should not be part of our process, and that it would be cleaner to have that sort of a discussion among citizens by this group of facilitators, and then those facilitators would be asked to come to a regular meeting and present their findings to us. I have had some feedback, but not everyone. I just wondered any strong feelings one way or the other on the meeting here that we might look for if there was something that was for more public comment. Yes, Ms. Rivers.
Madam Chair, we'll be presumably going out on our road show to different parts of the county. I think it would be great to do that here downstairs, is just to see how it might work, and then see if it would have value in taking it out to the rest of the county when we go to present our work.
Yeah, they were looking at coinciding with our first meeting in March. I told them it needed to be, because I had gotten feedback from several of you, it needed to be in response to what we had drafted so far, and not to mislead folks in thinking they could be real creative, which I love creativity, but I think it's disingenuous to ask the public for creative ideas and then say, oh, but we've already done that. So it would be to get feedback, so it's not as creative as it could be if this process had started 2 years ago. But yeah, let's. So I will continue to work with them on that possibility. I just wondered if there were any strong feelings about. It sounds like if we are to be involved downstairs, we need to come with a citizen mindset and not as educated freeholders, and I don't know how genuine that can be. Or the thing that also is that makes it a public meeting, an official public meeting, and so that totally, I think, might transform the discussion. So that was one of the reasons that someone voiced the opinion that we keep those totally separate and have the facilitators come to us with what they've found out and not try to have the freeholders participate in that.
So I think the time may be opportune to direct that question specifically to council, the extent to which having in effect, a quorum at that meeting, even if they're only there for purposes of listening, not even to mention participating, what she thinks of that. So if I could just ask Christine if you could please opine there.
Sure. If there were a quorum of freeholders at the meeting, it would be subject to the Open Public Meetings Act, so it would require a notice, it would require the same sorts of formalities with regard to minutes.
At every little table of the discussion, yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It would just make it a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm. I was afraid. That's what I figured. So let's proceed maybe then with folks on a separate function for citizens, and then a report back on their reaction to what we had drafted so far.
Nan?
Yes.
Maybe an alternative to avoid it being an official meeting, but at the same time get feedback from the people in the districts. Maybe the people in each district go back to the people in their district that week. It wouldn't be an official meeting because there wouldn't be a quorum, and then the following week they just come back to this meeting with the feedback from their individual districts. Mm-hmm. Just throwing that out as an idea.
Yes, Mr. Bull.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I am a lot, but if there's a quorum here, just like if there was a quorum for the county commissioners going to anything, that meeting would have to be public
Right.
noticed. But that's all it is. Just has to be noticed. I mean, when we go to when two of us went to the Chamber of Commerce or anything else, that was just noticed, but we didn't have minutes or anything else. So as long as it's noticed, I think that takes care of it.
That is true in that kind of context, but I think there's a distinctive difference here when they're attending a meeting that is directly related to the business of this board, as opposed to simply attending a public function that is outside the context of this board.
But Kelly, if there's actually no decisions made at that meeting,
It's not about whether you're making decisions, it's whether you're engaging in the subject matter that is the business of this board.
Randy Mueller?
I just throw out that maybe it's not either all or nothing. Besides all or nothing, what we could do is, if we wanted freeholder participation, is we could have up to 7, and just maybe people notify the chair if they're interested in working with that group. And I think, honestly, if 7 of us participated downstairs for an hour beforehand, they would get a pretty good representation of the group as a whole. So that might be another option, too.
Another option, yeah. Okay. All interesting thoughts. I'm glad I asked you, because there's so many things to consider. Speaking of outreach, I happily represented you folks at an interview recently for CVTV on Clark County Focus. So you might check it out and see if it reflected what we're up to. And if not, let me know, because they'll probably be asking me again. And I need a heads up.